she has to fit in, from 1970, she has to fit into 2001. So she is told to watch CNN, and she watches a lot of CNN, but then she switches the station and she discovers that her favorite soap opera, As the World Turns, not only is it still on, but the same actors playing the same roles. So it was that kind of thing that was just so trippy to me to kind of work into the story.
Did you purposely look for things like that, things that would be the same in 1970 and in 2001?
And I was pretty sure, I knew that some of the soap operas would be the same, so I did a little research and figured out which, I used one that I was familiar with from growing up, and figured out which characters are still playing the same old roles.
You all can admit it if you watch As the World Turns.
I did. She used with my grandmother.
With our grandmothers, that was it.
And when it comes to, I don't want to ask you like why time travel, because it's very clear if you read the book why time travel, but did you have a hard time writing it plausibly? Like, I mean, the sort of sciencey plausibility of it must have been a challenge.
It was a challenge, and I'll answer your why time travel,
okay.
And then I'll talk about the challenge. My former career was as a social worker, and for a long time I was a medical social worker, and I worked in a high-risk maternity unit. So I would see babies being born who didn't make it. This was in the early 80s. And as the decades went on, and I moved on to a private practice, and then I moved on to just writing, I still thought about those babies and the medical advances that were happening in our lives, and how if those babies had only been born 20 years later, they would have survived. And so that just stayed in my mind, and slowly I started thinking about what if this woman in 1970 is pregnant and learns that there's something fatal with her unborn baby, and what if she could go to the future and get medical treatment that would save this baby's life. So I talked to my agent about this. This was about 10 years ago. And I even wrote this long outline of the story. And she said, no way. She said, your readers, you're not that famous girl.
They're not going to follow
Exactly. She didn't say it quite that way, but she said they're not going to come with you on this journey. So I put it aside. And then when I got more famous, I dragged it out again. It was a pretty bad outline. So I came up with another way of telling the story, and I asked her, and she said, talk to your editor, and if she is on board, then go for it. So I told my editor the story just in maybe five sentences, and she said, wow, write it. And so finally I had permission. So obviously it was a book of my heart that had been in there wanting to come out for all that time. And what was the second part of your question?
I don't remember the second part of it. It was more about how did you make it plausible?
Oh yeah,
right? So.
Oh yeah, it's so plausible.
Well, you know, I mean, most people, when you talk time travel stories, if anybody here reads science fiction, I do read a lot of science fiction. It's a machine, you know, that you get into the TARDIS and you pull some levers and you walk out someplace new. Yeah. So that's not what happens here.
You know, I'm not a science fiction writer. I didn't know about those machines. That would have been so much easier. I like Outlander, both the books and the TV series. And in Outlander, she needs to have a gemstone, and she needs to go to these special rocks and touch them, and then magically she's transported. And then I like The Time Traveler's Wife, and that was a genetic disorder that the guy had that would make him uncontrollably travel in time. And then Stephen King's non-horror book, 11/22/63. Few of you have read it. I highly recommend it. It is such a gripping story. And in that story, there's a portal, a single portal. You walk through and you end up in a special date in 1955, I think it is. So they were the stories that I was thinking about as I was coming up with my own rules. You have to really come up with rules for your time travel world. I wanted it to be time travel, but so enmeshed in a realistic story that it felt real. So I don't know where the stepping off came from. For those of you who haven't read it, what you have to do in my world, you need to, at a certain time and a certain place, step off some structure that is at least 16 feet above the ground. And when I came up with that idea, I just fell in love with it. And I loved the concept of stepping off. It's a kind of this leap of faith. But Carly is terrified of doing this, as any of us would be. Hunter is her brother-in-law, and Hunter is, let me back up for a second, just tell you a little bit about this story for those of you who don't know. Carly learns that her baby has this fatal condition. She also has just lost her husband in Vietnam. And as she's moving through grieving and being pregnant, she moves in with her sister, Patty, and Patty's husband, Hunter. And they're in Nag's Head. And so when she learns that her baby has this fatal condition, Hunter, her brother-in-law, comes to her and tells her, do you think I'm sane? And she says, sure. And he tells her he is from the future and that she could go to the future and her baby can have treatment that could save its life. And she's thinking, where is the nearest psych unit? And then he is able to convince her that he's for real. And the way he does it is, it's early May 1970, and he tells her something that's going to happen in the next few days. Those of you who have not read it, you have any idea? You're all too young.
Yeah. That's how you just, our memories come.
Kent State.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And so when he tells her the National Guard will kill 4 students at Kent State.
Wow.
So when that happens, then she realizes he's telling her the truth. And so she and he together plan how she's going to step off. And he says, you could step off the roof of the house. Like, oh, here's an idea. And she says, I can't do that.
And she's pregnant.
She's pregnant. She's about 20 weeks pregnant at that point. And she says it has to be over water. So they decide on the end of the pier at Nag's Head. And that's as much as I'll tell you.
And it really becomes just sort of a natural phenomenon, these portals, right? It's just a question of predicting where they're going to be, and that's how she sort of seamlessly fits this. And although it does make me, like, worried about jumping off the pier.
Where will I end up?
And there's a lot of, I'm actually one of those people, I can't even watch other people near heights, so.
It's hard to read it.
So it is. I found myself literally holding the book like this as she would get to the edge of anything. And of course, if you saw anybody up on a bridge looking like they were about to jump off, I mean, you would panic, right? Yeah. So there was. It was all right. So I'm feeling like I But Carly and Hunter. I mean, that was such an interesting relationship. It's like the most important relationship in the book,
Trust. So much
actually.
trust.
So
There's so much trust, I think. Yeah.
right.
So
So
much
between
trust.
this woman and her brother-in-law. So why that relationship?
Yeah, I didn't plan it that way, but as I was thinking about the story, I'm thinking, who is this other person going to be who's going to help her? And he seemed logical. And then I started really liking that, because I love the idea that a man and a woman can be friends and can love each other as friends and as in-laws. And so he
Deeply
cares.
love each
He
other.
cares very
Yeah.
deeply about her, and she cares deeply about him. And he loves his wife deeply, and she loves her sister deeply. And so they have a very close relationship. And he is really nervous about getting everything right for her. So I just enjoyed their relationship, the men and women can be friends kind of aspect of it.
And, you know, there's you portray an amazing amount of trust between them. I mean, otherwise, what would make Carly even jump off the pier,
Mhm.
right, on his word? But I thought you did that beautifully. I was really impressed with
Thank
that.
you. Well, and she's also so desperate.
Mhm.
You know, really, I wanted this to be a story about how far a mother will go to save her child. And there just happens to be a little time travel.
And jumping off of that, Carly is a very different person from, when we meet her, she's, you know, in shock, right? She's just lost her husband. She's just been told that her baby has this fatal condition and it won't survive being born. And when she finally returns from her first foray into the future, she's an entirely different person. I mean, she's a brave, take charge kind of person. And this is really Carly's sort of story.
Mhm.
You know, despite all of the time travel and the gadgets that she meets and all of the things that happen to her, it's really Carly becoming Carly in the story, right?
I really like, if you're familiar with my books, it's usually taking somebody who's got some issues, a lot of times with courage, because that's always my issue, and becoming brave throughout the story.
And speaking of brave, those scenes in the hospital, in the pediatric intensive care unit, that's where I cried.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
from start to finish. Every time we got to one of those scenes, I was in tears. So, is all that from what you saw?
You know, it's
How did you
partly,
research? How do you research something like that?
it's partly from what I saw as a social worker. But my experience in the NICU is really old. It was the early 80s, a long time ago. So I was thinking about this because when I think about my research, I also had issues with the writing about Vietnam and writing from the perspective of a military wife. Because during that era, I was more the carrying the sign, protesting kind of person, not really able to relate to a military wife. So it's ironic that my next door neighbors in Raleigh, one is a Vietnam vet, the other is a NICU nurse.
Oh,
So I took him to lunch, and I took her to lunch. And she was just a huge help with all the NICU scenes because it's just changed so much. And what it would be like and how I could create more problems for Carly. She really helped me with that. And then Dave, my next door neighbor on the other side, really helped me get into the mind of a military family during that time. So I take a lot of people to lunch.
But there was more to it than that. I mean, there is, but you have Carly's sort of internal life as she is caring for her baby. She's sitting in the NICU, and she sees her baby with all of these things attached to her, and then the moment that she's allowed to pick her up,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, every single step of the way, you sort of demand the reader be right there.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been very hard. You're sort of magic, actually, the way you did that. So,
Thank you. Yeah, and it was, what's next and what does this baby look like? And I'm grateful to all of the moms and dads who keep blogs when their babies are in the NICU, because I saw a lot of pictures, I heard a lot of emotion of what it's like. And all of that was just so helpful in coming up with a composite. And then once the baby is free of all the apparatus and she could see her baby, then I asked on Facebook for people to send me baby pictures. And so I got, 100 newborn infant pictures to look at and to start feeling this baby.
Any, questions or comments, or I feel like we just sort of got people from to respond.
What are y'all thinking?
Well, I was just reading it, and I did read it, was that all through, your research had to be just insurmountable, because even researching a cell phone in, 20 years ago, and, the technology was so different. What did the street signs look like? What did the car, what were the cars? What were the clothes, the fashions? It wasn't just, you just couldn't go into your imagination.
Right.
You had to really
Right, the
do some heavy
technology
research.
wasn't there.
Yes,